Sarah, you awake? Please tell me you're up.
Mark, it's 2 a.m. Is everything okay? Is it Elena again?
No, it's Lily. She's been doing it again. Every single night this week.
Doing what? The sleepwalking?
It's not sleepwalking, Sarah. She waits until she thinks I'm asleep, then she creeps into our bedroom. But she doesn't come to my side. She goes straight to Elena.
That's just... Kids have nightmares, Mark. She's only 10.
She stands there, in the dark, just staring at her. I installed a camera,
You did what?
a hidden one, in the bookshelf facing the bed. I had to know if Elena was safe. Lily's been acting so cold lately.
Mark, that's your daughter. You're talking about her like she's a stranger.
23:22 a.m. I just watched the footage from last night. I can't breathe, Sarah. I actually can't breathe.
What did she do? Did she have a knife? Mark, talk to me.
There was no screaming, no blood. It was total silence. Lily didn't go there to hurt her,
Then why are you freaking out?
because Elena wasn't asleep.
What do you mean?
In the video, Elena is awake. She's crying, and someone else is in the room.
Who? You?
No, not me. I was passed out in the guest room because I had that early shift. There's a man, Sarah.
Mark, stop. Who?
It's Greg.
Your brother? Greg was in your bedroom?
2:35 a.m. He wasn't just there. Elena was trying to push him away, and Lily, my little girl, walked in and just stood between them. She didn't say a word. She just stared at him until he left.
Oh my God. Mark, tell me you're calling the police.
I confronted Elena 10 minutes ago. She begged me not to. She said it would destroy the family foundation. She's been letting him in. To protect me? To protect his reputation? I don't even know.
Letting him in? She's protecting a predator?
She told me Lily has been doing this for a month. Every night, Lily acts as a human shield because Elena is too scared to speak up. My 10-year-old daughter is the only one with guts in this house.
Where is Lily now?
She's sitting on the stairs. She saw me watching the tape. She just looked at me and said, "I waited for you to see, Dad."
Mark, listen to me. Get Lily out of there. Come to my place.
I can't just leave Elena.
Yes, you can. She chose Greg over her own child's safety.
She says she was trapped, that Greg threatened to ruin us. But the look in Lily's eyes, it's like she's 100 years old. I've spent my whole life building this perfect home. 50 stories of lies.
Mark, move. Now.
I'm looking at Greg's contact in my phone. He texted me yesterday asking to grab a beer. The rot is so deep, Sarah.
Don't do anything stupid. Just get the girl.
I'm not doing anything stupid. Some people would call this dad revenge.
Mark?
But it's not about punishment anymore. It's about protection. I lost a daughter tonight.
What are you talking about? She's right there.
I lost the illusion of who she was. She's not a child anymore. I did that to her. We did that to her. I'm choosing the truth, Sarah. Even if it burns the house down.
Mark, answer me. Where are you going?
To the station. With the tape. I'm shattering the foundation. It's the only way to save her.
What about Elena?
3:19 a.m. Elena can stay in the ruins. Lily and I are already gone. I've just shown you my honest whispers. And I also want you to hear my whole story, because it might be a life lesson for you. Night after night, my daughter would creep into my wife's bedroom. Finally, I installed a hidden camera just to make sure my wife was safe. But when I reviewed that footage and saw the truth, the shock didn't just hit me. It stole the breath right out of my lungs. There was no blood, no screaming. The video played in total silence. And in that quiet, I realized my family was already broken beyond repair. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Before we dive in, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and if you've ever felt an unsettling silence in your own home. And hey, don't forget to smash that like button and subscribe. This is a fictional story, dramatized for a deeper experience. They say a building is only as strong as its foundation, but standing 50 stories up above Minneapolis, I realized I'd spent 30 years erecting monuments of steel while my own home was rotting from the inside out. My name is Thane Garrison. I'm a 55-year-old senior project manager who spent 3 decades defining the Minneapolis skyline, never suspecting the catastrophic structural failure happening under my own roof. My life has been measured in blueprints, load-bearing capacities, and the cold, unyielding precision of architectural-grade steel. My professional portfolio sits at $28 million, built on the fact that I never missed a measurement and never tolerated a flaw. But as I leaned against the glass of the observation deck, with the wind at 50 stories howling through the seams of the newly installed panels, I felt a tremor that had nothing to do with wind load. For over a decade, I've been a ghost in my own life, a man who knows the thread count of the Ritz-Carlton sheets better than the pattern on his own duvet. I've clocked more hours in hotel rooms than in my own bed, sacrificing the warmth of a dinner table for the sterile efficiency of a construction site office. I convinced myself that the $28 million was armor, a structural reinforcement for the family I left behind in Edina. I told myself Alara understood the cost of the Garrison legacy, and that my daughter Liani was proud of the towers her dad raised. I believed that as long as the cash kept flowing and the foundations were poured level, the occupants of my life were safe and satisfied. I was a master builder after all. I knew how to manage stress, compensate for shifting soil, and ensure everything stayed vertical. Have you ever looked at a finished skyscraper and wondered which bolt is going to snap first? I should have been asking that about my own daughter. Looking out over the city, the smell of ozone and wet concrete from a nearby pour filled my lungs, a scent that usually brought me peace. Now it just felt heavy. I checked the gold watch on my wrist, a heavy $26,000 weight that felt like a shackle. Today, I was wrapping a grueling 3-week stint on a Denver skyscraper project. My mind was already drifting toward the flight home. Tomorrow marked my 26th anniversary with Alara. 26 years of her being the anchor, while I sailed into every storm that promised a higher profit margin. She deserved way more than roses this time. She deserved the man she married, not the project manager who merely penciled her in between deadlines. I had picked up a luxury sapphire necklace in Denver, a piece of jewelry that cost more than most people's starter homes. Convinced that this shimmering blue stone would somehow patch over the thousands of hours I'd been absent, I checked my phone for the third time in an hour. Liani had sent a short text earlier saying everything was fine at home, but her voice on our last call? It was off. There was a brittleness to her tone, a lack of the usual warmth that I'd just attributed to her being busy. I pushed the doubt aside, trusting in the stability of the house I'd built. Then the phone buzzed, a ghost in my pocket. It was a missed call notification and a voicemail from Alara, time-stamped at 3:00 in the morning the previous night. My thumb hovered over the screen, the static hiss of a low-quality recording playing in my head before I even hit the button. I hadn't heard the ring in my hotel room. There was no greeting, no anniversary wish, just a hollow silence followed by the sound of muffled, desperate sobbing. My heart hammered against my ribs, a rhythmic thumping that sounded like a pile driver on a hollow site. Behind the sobbing, there was a voice, a low, flat stranger's voice that had no business being in my house while I was gone. It was barely a... I played the message again, straining to hear that voice in the background, a voice that absolutely did not belong in my home. The wheels of the Gulf Stream slammed onto the tarmac with a violence that matched the storm in my chest. Every second of the taxi to the terminal felt like an hour stolen from Alara's life. I didn't wait for the stairs to fully lock before I was out of the cabin, the crisp Minnesota air biting at my lungs. Mike, my driver, was waiting by the black SUV, but I didn't give him a chance to get the door. "I don't have time for the scenic route, Mike. Give me the keys," I commanded, my voice sharp as a serrated blade. He didn't argue. He saw the fire in my eyes and handed over the fob. I threw myself into the driver's seat and the tires shrieked as I peeled away from the private hangar, leaving a cloud of white smoke drifting in the moonlight. 30 minutes to the front door. "Just hold on," I muttered, merging onto Highway 62. I wove through the late evening traffic with a reckless precision I usually reserved for high-stakes site inspections. The 3 a.m. voicemail looped in my head, a haunting soundtrack of muffled sobs and that low, flat stranger's voice. I ran through the logistics of my home security as the mile markers blurred past. I had spent a fortune on motion sensors and reinforced glass, but I realized with a sickening jolt that I'd left too much trust in the hands of others. I had built a fortress, but I was beginning to fear. I had locked my wife inside it with a ghost. You spend your life building walls to keep the world out, but you never think about what happens when the poison is already inside the room. I turned into the gated community, the SUV bumping over the curb as I accelerated toward our property. The long, winding driveway was flanked by skeletal trees. Their shadows stretched across the light snowfall like reaching fingers. As the house came into view, my heart sank. It was too dark for an anniversary night. Usually, Ara had the entire facade illuminated, warm gold spilling from every window to welcome me home. Tonight, only a single flickering light in the upstairs hallway offered any sign of life. I slammed the brakes and barely waited for the engine to die before I was sprinting for the front door. I reached for my keys, but my hand stopped. The door was unlocked, unheard of, for my security-obsessed household. Someone had been in such a hurry to enter or leave that they forgot the deadbolt. I pushed it open, dropping my leather bags on the marble floor with a hollow echo. I was immediately hit by a heavy medicinal smell, antiseptic and stale tea that didn't belong in my home. "Ara, I'm home early," I called out, but only the wind, whistling through the chimney, answered me. "Why is it so cold in here?" I moved toward the living room, my boots clicking rhythmically against the hardwood. My wife, Ara Garrison, 52, sat staring at the garden we had planted together, a ghost of the woman who once commanded every room she entered. She was sitting in a high-backed velvet chair. She was wearing a deep emerald designer gown that hung off her frame as if she had shrunk. Her skin looked gray and translucent, almost papery, under the dim, recessed lighting. "Happy anniversary, sweetheart. I brought the red ones," I whispered, stepping into her line of sight with the bouquet of roses. She flinched away as if I were a stranger, her eyes glassy and unfocused. She didn't look at the flowers. She looked through me. The roses hit the floor, red petals scattering like blood on the white marble. Who are you?" "No visitors tonight," she rasped, her voice a fragile shadow of its melodic tone. God, I loved her. I reached out, taking her dry, cold hand in mine, desperate for a spark of recognition. As I pulled her sleeve back slightly to find her pulse, I froze. Deep circular bruising was hidden under the silk, looking like someone had held her down with force. The woman who once ran an empire couldn't even recognize her own husband. But the bruises on her wrist told a story that her lips couldn't find the words for. The sharp click-clack of designer heels against the marble foyer cut through the silence like a jackhammer. Ara's head snapped toward the door with a look of terror in her trembling pupils that chilled my marrow. Standing there was Lainey Garrison, my 25-year-old daughter. Her eyes filled with a concern so polished it should have been my first warning sign. She froze for a heartbeat, her hand tightening around a leather folio. "Dad, you weren't supposed to be home until tomorrow," she said, her voice dropping into a register of practiced sorrow. She was across the room in a blur of silk, physically stepping between me and Ara, effectively breaking the contact I was trying to establish. Before I could ask about the bruises I had seen on Ara's wrist, Lainey was already delivering the blow. "It's early onset dementia. Dr. Boyd says it is aggressive. I have been doing everything myself for the last month so you could focus on the Denver build. I didn't want to break you while you were managing that skyscraper project." I stood there, the anniversary roses still scattered on the floor like a bloodstain on the white stone. I watched my daughter reveal that she had already obtained a temporary power of attorney while I was away. She claimed it was medically necessary for immediate treatments, some legal loophole she exploited while I was 3 states away. I made the mistake of leaving my wife in her care. Watching them now, she handled Era like chipped inventory. Instead of a mother, her movements were clinical, completely stripped of the warmth a daughter should have for a dying parent. You know those buildings that look pristine from the street, but deep down you know the support beams are rotting sawdust? That was exactly how Lainey sounded. She shoved a heavy binder at me, the aggressive rustle of medical charts sucking the air out of the room as she pointed to dosages and timestamps. When I asked about the black and blue marks, she waved them off, claimed Mom was just clumsy, losing her motor skills as the disease ramped up. I searched Era's eyes for the fierce woman who used to command an art gallery, but Leanie was already marching her up the staircase. Back off. Dad, you're gonna cause a scene. She needs to sleep, right now. Too much excitement this late just makes the sundowning worse. I reached out to comfort my wife, but she recoiled. Her empty eyes were glued to Leanie like a prisoner watching a warden. The air was thick with the antiseptic stench of prescription bottles, totally overpowering the soft lavender scent Era had worn for 20 years. Leanie didn't waste a second. She coolly announced she'd already dumped my luggage in the spare bedroom, claiming Mom needed a strict routine without a husband who'd been missing in action for weeks, messing up her sleep hygiene. The sheets in the guest room felt like ice against my skin when I finally collapsed on the edge of the mattress that night. The whole house felt wrong, like a gutted building. The diagnosis was Alzheimer's, but my gut was screaming bullshit. I've spent my entire career staring at blueprints, hunting for the single flaw that could topple $100 million skyscraper. And Leanie's story had a massive structural defect, a hairline fracture she failed to cover up. I flipped open the file she'd abandoned in the hall. My hands were rock steady despite my heart hammering against my ribs as I zoomed in on the doctor's signature. Dr. Richard Cole. Seeing that name made the hair on my arms prickle. I knew that guy from 5 years back. He was a specialist. I kicked off a job site for faking safety reports and pocketing bribes. Leanie's pristine medical evaluation was rubber-stamped by a hack who'd sell his own mother just to move a decimal point on a check. Suddenly, those bruises on Era's arms didn't look like accidents anymore. They looked like evidence. You don't sleep when your job is structural integrity and you realize your own family is built on quicksand. I stayed dressed, lying on top of the covers, watching the ceiling fan chop through the dead air. I was wide awake, tuning into the frequencies of the estate. I analyzed every creak of the floor and every rattle of the HVAC unit with the obsession of a project manager. Boyd was the key. What did she offer him? Guys like Dr. Richard Cole don't just wander into family tragedies by accident. They get invited, usually by someone trying to bury a secret. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. This house used to be my sanctuary, a quiet refuge after months on deafening construction sites. Now, the silence was heavy, pressing down on my chest like concrete. I went to check the hall, but my hand paused on the knob. I froze. The metallic tang of fresh industrial lubricant hit me. The hardware was new. Leanie had ripped out the old handles on Era's door and installed high-end smart locks, the kind you control with an encrypted app. She wasn't keeping Era safe. She was keeping me out. At 1:45 in the morning, a noise shattered the quiet. The electronic deadbolt disengaged, followed by soft, calculated footsteps. Someone knew exactly where to step to avoid the squeaks. I cracked my door open just a sliver, ignoring the bite of the cold wood on my toes. A silhouette cut through the dim blue wash of the nightlight. Leanie. She didn't flip a single switch. If you're a loving daughter checking on your sick mom, you turn on a lamp. You don't skulk around in the dark. I watched her slip into the master suite, the door sealing shut with a soft electronic chirp. I started counting. 1 minute. 5. 10. My brain cycled through every horrible scenario. 20 minutes passed. What the hell was she doing in the pitch black for 20 minutes? Move, Tyne. Go look. You know that gut punch feeling when you realize the person you die for is actually the one holding the gun? I ghosted down the hallway, heart thudding against my ribs, until I stood right outside the bedroom door. Then, I waited. That dead silence behind the master bedroom door was louder than any scream. It took 40 agonizing minutes before the latch finally clicked. Lainey stepped out, nearly jumping out of her skin when she spotted me lurking in the hallway shadows. The doting daughter act evaporated instantly. The mask of grief slipped, revealing something sharp, ugly, and defensive. What exactly were you doing in there for 40 minutes, Lainey? My voice was a low, rough rumble. She didn't even flinch. She got right in my face, invading my space, cleaning up an accident. Not that you'd understand. You wouldn't know anything about it. You were too busy building skyscrapers in Denver to give a damn about Mom's dignity. I looked at her eyes. They weren't the blue. I remembered. They were cold, hard steel, staring back at me like a stranger's. She wasn't done. Before I could push past her, she whipped a folded paper out of her robe pocket. A medical directive, signed and sealed. Read it and weep. It states that your presence causes the patient undue distress in her current condition. Her whisper sounded like sandpaper on bone. You interfere again? Or try to force that door? I have the legal authority to have the cops drag you out of here tonight. I looked at the document, then at the girl I raised, and realized the foundation had already crumbled beneath my feet. This wasn't caretaking. She was constructing a prison cell, and she'd just handed me the eviction notice to my own life. I waited until the soft click of Lainey's door told me she was down for the count before I ghosted into the kitchen, heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I started sifting through the wreckage of our family history in the garbage. The house was dead silent, but the secrets I was digging up were screaming at me. I yanked the heavy plastic bags from the bin, the crinkling sound echoing in the massive room like a thunderclap. My hands steady enough to calibrate a laser level, shook as the stench of stale coffee and sour milk hit me. Buried deep, I found a receipt for a heavy-duty industrial shredder, bought the exact day I flew out to Denver. That detail hit my gut like a wrecking ball. Lainey was systematically erasing something. Financial records, memories, maybe evidence. Then, under a stack of junk mail, I uncrumpled a notice from some high-stakes underground casino. It was a final collection demand for a $150,000 personal loan. 150 grand. My little girl was bleeding cash into a black hole. And right next to the debt notice lay 3 empty glass vials. These weren't the Alzheimer's meds she showed me. This was a heavy-grade sedative. The sticky residue on the glass felt cold against my skin, like a curse. This wasn't healthcare. It was a chemical leash. You think you know your own flesh and blood until you see their signature on a debt note worth more than a human life. Realizing my daughter was bankrolling a gambling addiction with her mother's life force twisted my stomach into a knot of cold fury. I sat on the cold tile until the first gray light of dawn bled through the windows, feeling less like a master builder and more like a scavenger. By 8 o'clock, I was in the breakfast nook, watching Laura try to eat. The only sound in the room was the pathetic rattle of a silver spoon against fine china. Hands that used to restore delicate oil paintings were now just trembling claws of blue veins, unable to lift a spoonful of oatmeal. She was deteriorating faster than nature should allow. People don't just fade away like this while they're still breathing. Lainey, I said, my voice thick with choked-back rage. She didn't even look up from her tablet. She wiped a spill from Laura's chin with a clinical detachment that made my skin crawl. It's a degenerative condition, Dad, she clipped out. Maybe if you had actually been here, you wouldn't be so shocked. She talked about her mother like she was a broken appliance, an inconvenience to manage, not a woman to love. I had to get out of that room. I needed to get Laura into the sunlight, away from the medicinal gloom of this house. I helped her into the garden, her body feeling light and fragile as balsa wood. We took 3 steps onto the manicured lawn before her muscles just quit. She collapsed against me, a dead weight I barely managed to catch. Laura wasn't just sick. She was a skyscraper, with her support beams being sawed through in the dark. I lowered her onto a stone bench and searched her eyes. For a split second, the fog lifted. Fane, she whispered, her voice a ghostly rasp. Make it stop. Please. That moment of clarity shattered my heart into 1,000 jagged shards. I'm going to fix this, Laura. I promise. As I scooped her up to carry her back inside, my hand grazed the hem of her designer gown. I felt something small and hard sewn into the stitching. I reached in and fished out a miniature digital recorder. Someone had crushed it. The plastic casing splintered, and the internal chips snapped with a deliberate, sickening crunch. Ara had tried to catch them on tape, but the evidence had been found and destroyed, leaving her with nothing but a bruised soul. I straightened my tie in the reflection of the clinic's glass doors, smoothing down the rage that threatened to crack my professional mask before I stepped inside to confront the man who had signed my wife's death warrant. The antiseptic sting of the clinic air hit me instantly, a sharp chemical slap compared to the scent of wood smoke and autumn I'd left outside. I marched across the linoleum, the squeak of my rubber soles echoing like a warning shot. A cold, robotic receptionist tried to block my path, her eyes glued to a digital monitor. "Mr. Garrison, you can't just walk back there," she droned in a flat monotone. "The doctor is with a patient." I didn't break stride. "I'm not here for an appointment. I'm here for the truth. Get Boyd out here," I barked, leaning over her desk just enough to show her the authority I'd honed on 40 construction sites. I reminded her that I was the primary policyholder and the legal spouse. I scanned the layout while she scrambled to make a call. The place didn't feel like a neurology center. It felt like a private clubhouse, hushed and over-decorated, designed to keep the real world at a comfortable distance. Within minutes, the man himself appeared. Dr. Richard Cole, a 63-year-old neurologist with a smile that never quite reached his predatory eyes, standing behind a mahogany desk that cost more than a nurse's annual salary. When we finally sat in his private office, he projected an air of manufactured empathy that made me want to puke. He started recycling the same Alzheimer's script I'd heard from Leanne, citing atypical rapid onset and high-stress triggers. I sat there, hands clasped tight to hide the tension. How much does it cost to buy a doctor's signature in Minneapolis these days? Apparently, the price was a piece of jewelry and my wife's sanity. I clocked the high-end luxury watch on Boyd's wrist, the exact limited edition model Leanne had bragged about buying for a special client last month. The gold glint of the watch face under the office lights was a beacon of corruption. I pushed him for the digital lab results, my voice a low, dangerous rumble. "I build skyscrapers, doctor. I know when a report has been doctored to hide a structural failure. I want the raw data." He didn't flinch, but his eyes shifted to the cold glass of the window. "There's been a server glitch. It's temporarily locked the records. I'll email them to you later tonight." It was a lie I'd heard 100 times from crooked contractors, and it confirmed everything. I let him walk me to the exit, playing the part of the frustrated, defeated husband. As I passed a side employee entrance, I caught a flash of familiar blonde hair. I ducked into a small alcove, my heart hammering against my ribs. Leanne was walking through that side door, bypassing the waiting room entirely. I watched as she greeted Dr. Boyd in the hallway. Then she touched him. Not a daughter's touch, a lover's. She reached out and fixed Boyd's collar with a possessive flick, and they shared a look of familiar, predatory intimacy that made my skin crawl. It wasn't professional. It was a partnership. "Is he gone? Did he buy it?" I heard her whisper, the hush of their conspiracy carrying clearly in the quiet corridor. Boyd chuckled, a sound like dry leaves skittering on pavement. "He's suspicious, Leanne. We need to accelerate the timeline." He reached into his lab coat and handed her a fresh batch of unlabeled vials. "Here, sweetheart. Keep her steady." My own daughter was standing there, accepting a chemical arsenal from the man she was sleeping with to destroy the mother who had given her everything. Seeing my daughter's hand on that man's chest made my stomach turn, but it gave me the one thing I needed, a target for the cameras I was about to install. I sat in the silence of my SUV, the Minneapolis skyline, taunting me with its orderly beauty, while I calculated the cost of turning my own home into a high-stakes interrogation room. The image of Leanne's hand on Dr. Boyd's chest was burned into my retinas like a welding flash, a jagged white scar on my memory that refused to fade. I gripped the steering wheel until the leather groaned, forcing my breathing into the rhythmic, a shallow pattern I used when a site inspection went south. My daughter was no longer just a doting caretaker. She was an operative in a coordinated assault on the woman I loved. I needed eyes where I was blind. I needed a recording that couldn't be disputed by a disgraced doctor's forged medical charts. The glare of the late afternoon sun on the windshield blinded me for a second as I pulled out of the parking lot, heading south toward Bloomington. I wasn't looking for a retail security solution. I was looking to expose industrial-grade betrayal. I parked the truck in front of a nondescript storefront, squeezed between a wholesale plumbing supplier and a boutique data recovery lab. No neon signs, just a small, etched square on the glass. The place smelled like burnt solder and static electricity. The only sound was the low drone of server fans' white noise for the business of keeping secrets. A kid with dark circles under his eyes looked up from a motherboard. I skipped the pleasantries. I need 24-hour remote access, encrypted cloud storage, and I need the status lights killed on every unit, I said, my voice cutting through the hum. He hesitated, recognizing me from a trade magazine that was sitting on the counter. Mr. Wright, I saw the specs on your new tower. I cut him off. This isn't for a daycare kid. I'm locking down a high-value asset against a hostile threat. He nodded slowly, then dropped a bombshell that nearly knocked me off my feet. He told me a woman matching Lean's description had been in here 3 weeks ago, asking specifically about the range of high-frequency signal jammers. My blood ran cold. You know that feeling when the hair on your neck stands up because you realize the predator you're stalking has been hunting you the whole time? Lean wasn't just planning a poisoning. She was researching how to blind me before the fight even started. I selected the 4K pinhole cameras disguised as smoke detectors, a functional phone charger for the kitchen, and a digital alarm clock for Era's nightstand that was a dead ringer for the one she'd owned for years. The plastic felt like a chunk of ice in my palm. I paid cash, peeling bills from a stash I kept for off-the-books site emergencies. No paper trail for the accountants, and definitely no trail for the daughter who watched my finances like a hawk. My phone buzzed against my sweaty palm. Lean's name flashed on the screen. I took a deep breath, sliding my project manager mask over the rage. Hey, sweetie, I said, my voice steady enough to beat a polygraph. I'm just tied up reviewing site permits for Phase 2. I'll be home for dinner. Her reply was sugary, but I heard the steel underneath. Mom is resting, Dad. She does so much better when it's just the two of us. Don't rush. The bag of cameras on the passenger seat felt heavier than 100 tons of structural steel. It was the weight of proof. A burden of truth I wasn't sure I could carry, but I was out of options. Walking back to the SUV, I opened the demo app to test the receiver sync. A red alert popped up instantly. Active unauthorized Bluetooth signal broadcasting from my own undercarriage. My heart stopped. A localized tracker. A magnetic leech feeding off my car battery. My daughter wasn't just occupying the house. She'd turned my own tools against me. Now I had to install my eyes without her seeing me blink. I didn't drive home. Instead, I swerved into a muddy construction site 2 miles down the road. I crawled under the SUV with a flashlight in my teeth to rip out the digital parasite she used to leash me. The metal flashlight casing tasted bitter, like the foul game I was forced to play. I felt the grit of road salt and mud as I found the tracker stuck near the rear axle. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my hands were steady engineer's hands. I didn't just smash it. I saw a long-haul semi-idling at the gate. With a calculated flick, I stuck the tracker to its chassis. Enjoy the trip to St. Paul, Lean. I'm going dark. I had exactly 30 minutes before her therapy session with Era ended a window tighter than the tolerances on a high-speed rail line. I took the back roads, avoiding every main thoroughfare, and ditched the SUV 3 blocks away under a weeping willow. I cut through the wooded perimeter where I played as a kid. The smell of wet pine needles did nothing to settle the adrenaline flooding my veins. I slipped through the basement utility door, moving with the silence of a man who knew every beam and joist of the house he paid for. I crept up the stairs, listening. I knew immediately the atmosphere in the master bedroom had shifted. Lean wasn't just asking about jammers. She'd already installed a professional-grade white noise generator. The high-pitched whine was subtle, a steady hiss, designed to mask a struggle or a desperate scream. It made the air feel thick, pressurized, like the house was holding its breath along with me. Or maybe it was just the air ducts settling. I didn't have a second to waste feeling guilty about the intrusion. I slipped into the kitchen and rigged a microcam inside the vent grill. It gave me a perfect line of sight to the breakfast nook. Then I sprinted back to the master suite. The scent of cedar oil, her favorite, hung in the air. But today, it smelled like a funeral home. Forgive me, Era. I have to be your eyes, now that they've blinded you. My hands wouldn't stop shaking as I pried open the casing of the high-end designer clock on her nightstand. I wedged the 4K lens into a gap barely the size of a pinhead. Focus. Syncing feed. 10%. 50%. Done. My engineer's brain was warring with the gut-wrenching nausea of spying on my dying wife in her own bed. But the only other option was leaving her defenseless in the dark. I designed this damn house, but right now, I was just a ghost haunting the hallways I paid for with 30 years of grinding. I did one last sweep, looking for slip-ups. My fingers grazed the hidden catch inside the nightstand drawer, a secret compartment I built ages ago. It was meant for her diaries. I slid it open, expecting leather-bound journals, but the air caught in my lungs. Instead, I pulled out a stack of death certificates. Pre-filled. Official. Her name, birth date, cause of death. Cardiac arrest, triggered by neurodegenerative failure. Every single line was inked in block letters. The only blank space was the date of death. My own daughter had the paperwork ready before her mother's heart had even stopped beating. Then, tires crunched on the gravel outside. Lean was home early, and I was standing center stage in the bedroom holding the evidence of her treachery. I shoved the papers into the waistband of my pants just as the bedroom door swung open with a slow, accusatory creak. The stiff paper dug into my lower back like a blade, but I kept my face stone cold. I scrambled away from the nightstand, putting distance between me and the camera. I grabbed a towel from the ensuite rack, spinning around to play it cool. Lean framed the doorway, backlit by the hall sconces, her eyes scanning the room like a security sweep. "I'm heading out, Leanie. The Denver Foundation is cracking. No time to debrief," I barked, pitching my voice with just the right amount of stress. It was the same tone I used to bully contractors when a job site was going sideways. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but I forced my breathing to stay rhythmic. "You look flushed, Dad. You okay to fly?" she asked. But that wasn't concern dripping from her voice. It was an assessment. I brushed past her, choking on the cloud of heavy floral perfume she wore. "I'm good. Just need to get this project back on the rails." I pretended to check a text, ranting about permits to distract her from the clock I'd just tampered with. That's when it hit me. I wasn't just leaving for a business trip. I was retreating from a war zone. Lean had casually mentioned a specialized cleaning crew coming in 2 days. I knew that company. You only called them to scrub a house after a decomposing body had been found. The trap was set. She was just waiting for the cement to dry. The next morning, I played my part on the front porch. The doting father, the exhausted husband performing for whatever surveillance Lean hadn't cut yet. I leaned down to kiss Era goodbye. Her skin felt unnaturally cold. Her pulse fluttered like a trapped bird. She looked right through me, sedated by whatever cocktail Lean was feeding her. I reached into my coat and handed Lean a thick roll of bills. Cash for emergency expenses. I saw the micro-twitch in her fingers. Pure greed she couldn't hide as she pocketed the loot. "Take care of her, Lean. She's my whole world." The words tasted like battery acid. "Don't worry about a thing, Dad. Everything is under control." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. It was shark-like. Have you ever looked into your child's eyes and realized you're staring at a stranger holding the blueprints to your ruin? I walked to the SUV, knowing if my tech failed, I'd never see my wife breathe again. I drove to the airstrip on autopilot, numbness taking over. The death certificates were still burning a hole against my spine. I didn't exhale until I was buckled into the leather seat of the jet. The hangar doors sealed shut. I was locking the world out. As the turbines whined to life and we hit cruising altitude, I pulled my phone from my inside pocket. My hands finally started shaking as I opened the encrypted app. The 4K feed loaded instantly, crystal clear. A digital window into the hell I just left behind, and Lean didn't have a clue. The master suite feed showed nothing but emptiness. The silence likely filled by the static hiss of the white noise machine. I tapped the screen to switch cameras and felt the air vanish from my lungs. Lainey wasn't by her mother's bedside. She was downstairs in the kitchen. She moved with a strange, fluid energy, swaying to a beat that played only in her own head. I watched her raid the wine cellar, pulling out a rare vintage I had been aging for a special occasion, the cork popping with a crisp snap that echoed through the hidden microphone. She poured a generous glass, her features illuminated by the ghostly blue light of her smartphone resting on the granite island. She was mid-conversation on speakerphone, her laughter jagged and cold. "We are in the home stretch," she said, her voice trembling with adrenaline. "Dr. Boyd is ready." The 4K resolution was unforgiving, capturing every detail as Lainey raised a toast to the invisible lens she didn't know existed, while a voice I recognized from a 3AM voicemail drifted from the speaker. The man on the other end finally put a name to the shadow, cutting straight to the logistics of the payout. Cruising at 30,000 feet felt like a sick cosmic joke. I was physically closer to heaven, but staring straight into the bowels of hell on a 4-inch display. My fingers dug into the leather armrests of the darkened first-class cabin. The thin hiss of the oxygen system sounded like a long, dying breath, while my tablet sat propped on the tray table like a judge's sentence. The high-definition feed was so sharp I felt I could reach through the glass and touch the cold marble of my own kitchen. Lainey was still hovering over her phone, wine in hand, when the voice on the line cut through the silence again. My veins turned to ice. Brandon Walsh, a 30-year-old corporate shark with no conscience and a talent for embezzlement, was the same man I had destroyed professionally 3 years ago. Now, he was dismantling my family. I recalled the aggressive young analyst I had fired for selling trade secrets, the very man Lainey had recently brought home as her trusted financial advisor. She had sworn he was just helping manage her trust fund portfolio, but the dialogue streaming into my earbuds wasn't about dividends. It was a timeline for liquidation. "Is the blueprint ready for the final sign-off?" "Lainey?" Ethan's voice crackled through the iPad's tiny speakers. Lainey didn't even glance up from her swirling wine. "He is in the air, Ethan. The house is a tomb. Time to close the contract," she replied. I hit record on the app, my hands shaking with a cold, predatory fury as I realized this wasn't just robbery. They were sledgehammering the very foundation of my life. I watched Lanny set down the stemware and march toward the cabinetry with a resolve that made my stomach turn. She reached under the primary cupboard into a hidden compartment I had built for the deed, retrieving a porcelain mortar and pestle instead. If you want to see the true face of evil, look at a child smiling while they prepare a lethal cocktail for their parents. She began emptying a nondescript baggie, spilling several types of pills onto the counter. A clinical horror froze me in my seat as she dropped 3 white tablets and 2 blue capsules into the bowl. The grinding of ceramic on ceramic was faint but distinct, a rhythmic, bone-chilling scratch that signaled the end of Lara's lucidity. Laney's hands were rock steady, the dexterity of a master builder repurposed for assassination. She wasn't just pulverizing medication. She was grinding down Lara's will to fight back. She was mixing a chemical leash, sedatives and scopolamine, designed to induce a perfect, artificial fog. "Just a little sweet treat for you, Mom. For the memories," she whispered to the empty room. "I am the only one who looks after you now." She whisked the white dust into a dark, amber liquid. Her focus was absolute. Crush, stir, serve. The mechanics of murder were terrifyingly simple. It was the structural demolition of a human mind, executed with the same precision I used to calculate load-bearing walls. I leaned in until my nose nearly brushed the cold blue screen, watching the powder dissolve into a toxic brew that masqueraded as a comforting nightcap. Lainey checked her smartwatch as it emitted a sharp, digital chirp that ricocheted off the kitchen tiles. It hit me that this wasn't a random dosage. It was a synchronized strike. She was coordinating the poison with Ethan's breach of the estate perimeter. The plan was accelerating toward a deadline I hadn't yet factored into the equation. I felt structurally compromised, a man who spent 40 years engineering safety for the world, only to harbor the catastrophic failure under his own roof. Lainey arranged the cup and a few crackers on a tray with a sickeningly tender attention to detail. She pivoted toward the hallway, the steam from the poisoned cup trailing behind her like a ghost stalking the woman I loved. I squeezed the armrests until the leather groaned, helpless as I watched Lainey push open the door to the master suite. Steam drifted off the poisoned tea, coiling around her face like a funeral veil. My tablet display was crystal clear, making the scene feel like a gut punch, a total invasion of the sanctuary I'd built. My wife was collapsed against the headboard. She moved like she was wading through molasses, her gaze already lost in a narcotic fog. Lainey didn't flinch. She perched on the mattress and yanked Era upright, pressing the porcelain rim to her lips with a gentleness that was far more terrifying than a knife. Era fought back, her hand shaking violently as she pawed feebly at the saucer. "This tastes off, Leanie. Like pennies. Where's Thane?" My wife's whisper was brittle, a dry rasp that splintered my chest. Leanie didn't miss a beat. She wore a mask of perfect daughterly worry as she leaned in. "Drink it all, Mom. It's just that new organic honey blend the specialist sent over. You know how bad your episodes get when you miss a dose. You're just confused again, sweetie." I watched in horror as Leanie admitted she'd been hijacking my calls for months, using deepfake audio to convince Era I was buried in the Denver project and couldn't talk. She was scrubbing me from Era's memory while shutting down her organs, a double-tap demolition that left me gasping in the jet's cabin. I saw the last spark of awareness fade from my wife's eyes as she finished the tea. The sedative slammed into her system. Her head lolled back onto the pillows, her breath hitching into a shallow, ragged ghost of a rhythm. Leanie loomed over her, the doting act replaced by cold, clinical detachment, before she cranked up the white noise machine. The rhythmic static flooded the room, drowning out the rest of the house. To them, Era wasn't a human being anymore. She was a structural liability, a piece of rotted timber needing removal before new construction. I sat paralyzed at 30,000 feet, watching a shadow glide across the bedroom floor. Brandon Walsh stepped into frame through the master balcony doors, his boots silent on the plush carpet. He ignored the body, heading straight for the vanity to audit a stack of legal files. They stopped whispering, their voices captured with sickening clarity by the pinhole camera I'd concealed in the clock. "Is she under?" Ethan asked, his tone flat and corporate. "We can't afford any more confusion." Leanie checked Era's pulse with robotic efficiency. "The scopolamine is working. She won't remember a thing, even if she wakes up," she said. A cold, lethal focus settled over me. My brain shifted gears, calculating the logistics of the hell I'd rain down the second I touched tarmac. How do you sit still in a pressurized tube at 30,000 feet while a man you fired plans your wife's funeral? Ethan reached into his blazer and produced a sterile plastic case. He withdrew a syringe, the light catching the cold glint of the needle. He laid it out. A massive stroke triggered by an air embolism clean, an untraceable execution scheduled for next Tuesday, right when the cleaning crew was booked to scrub the crime scene. He flicked the syringe barrel, eyes on the deadly air pocket inside. He checked his watch. 10 days. Leanie. 10 days until we're worth $28 million. I stared at that bubble, the end of my world trapped in plastic, while my finger hovered over the console's satellite phone. The game had shifted from surveillance to survival. My thumb trembled over the dial pad. My vision blurred as I fixated on that air pocket. A tiny, translucent executioner waiting for a Tuesday I'd ensure never came. The leather armrest felt unnaturally cold. I was 30,000 feet over Nebraska, trapped in a flying tin can, but the digital clarity of the 4K feed transported me right back to the master bedroom, close enough to smell the Earl Grey and the betrayal. I didn't blink. I punched in a number I hadn't touched in 5 years, the plastic clicks of the sat phone echoing in the silent cabin like a countdown. Agent Susan Reed, a 43-year-old federal shark with a voice like sharpened flint, was the woman who'd helped me tear down a billion-dollar kickback scheme 5 years back. When she picked up, I skipped the pleasantries. "Christine, it's Thane Garrison," I said, my voice harder than the steel beams I used to inspect. "I'm pushing a link and encrypted creds to your secure line. Pull up the master bedroom feed. Now." The line crackled for a heartbeat before her professional composure shattered. "I have visual. Thane. My God. Is that a sedative cocktail or something worse?" Then came the moment the bottom fell out. Parker revealed the FBI already had an active file on Brandon Walsh for an unrelated offshore racketeering case. The money laundering wasn't just a side hustle, it was the key. My evidence turned a hunch into a no-knock federal warrant. The predator I was tracking was already circling their nets. I simply provided the laser guidance for the strike. In construction, you have contingencies for a snapped beam or a delayed shipment, but you don't have a blueprint for the moment your own daughter becomes the demolition crew. I stared at my reflection ghosting against the jet window, lit by the nervous twitch of my phone screen. The cabin reeked of stale, recycled air. I walked Agent Parker through the whole ugly tapestry. Brandon Walsh, Dr. Boyd, the medical fraud. I needed her to understand this wasn't a domestic squabble. It was a calculated hit. A capital crime designed to liquidate my wife and hijack our estate. Parker's tone dropped into that professional, icy calm I knew well. I needed that. She confirmed that the presence of scopolamine and the documented threat of an air embolism kicked this up to federal jurisdiction. We need a ghost extraction, I said. My mind was already drafting the tactical approach. If Leanne sees lights and sirens, she empties that syringe before you even shift into park. I walked her through the schematics of the house, the steel core doors, the sensor grids, the breach points. Leanne forgot who built that fortress. I knew every bolt, beam, and crawl space in the place. I designed it to be a sanctuary to keep the world out. Now, I was handing the FBI the keys to invade it. Static hissed on the line. Parker's voice cut through. We're greenlit. We are taking the residence. She started barking orders to attack Med Squad in Minneapolis, ensuring they were wheels up the second I touched down. Protocol is active, she told me. You're on the ground in 3 hours. We'll have a secure extraction team waiting at the terminal. I squeezed the phone until my knuckles turned white, the drone of the jet engines roaring in the dead silence of the cabin. Leanne's voice drifted through the surveillance feed again, a hollow, metallic sound that didn't belong to the girl I raised. She was discussing crematorium services with Ethan, her tone as casual as if she were ordering takeout. The plan was to cremate Ara immediately after the induced stroke, to torch the toxicology evidence. The precision of it hit me hard. They had war-gamed everything. The falsified charts, the forged power of attorney, the disposal of the remains. It sunk in then. I wasn't flying home for an anniversary. I was deploying into a combat zone. I leaned back, letting the chill of the leather seat seep into my bones, steeling myself to tear down the life I'd built. I didn't give Leanne a chance to spin her story. I burst through the door with the force of a shaped charge. I wrenched the steak knife from her grip before her sociopathic brain could process I was in the room. She let out a sharp, offended shriek, but I was already past her, tossing the blade to Beckett. Pin them, I barked, leaving him to jam Leanne and Ethan against the stainless steel fridge. I didn't look back. My entire world narrowed to the sounds from the second floor, that weak, rhythmic hacking that signaled my wife's body was shutting down. I took the oak stairs 3 at a time, the noise of the kitchen brawl fading below. The master suite was locked. From the hallway, a physical manifestation of the cell Leanne had built to rot her mother in. I didn't fumble for keys. I filled my lungs, dropped my shoulder, and aimed for the stress point I'd framed up 30 years ago. I hit it with everything I had. Wood screamed and shattered under the impact. The door swung inward, unleashing a wave of stagnant air and chemical reek. I saw Ara in the shadows, her skin the color of ash in the moonlight. I've got you, Ara. The builder's home, I choked out, my heart breaking at the vacancy in her eyes. Thane? Her voice was just dust and friction. Is it finally Tuesday? I looked up. No smoke detector. Leanne had stripped the room. She had cut every single lifeline Ara had to the outside world. The door was down. The lies were over. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the heavy wool duvet and swaddled her shivering, fragile body, scooping her up into my arms. She felt impossibly light, as if my daughter had hollowed her out from the inside. I turned and headed for the stairs. Downstairs, the main entrance exploded open. Agent Parker led a tidal wave of windbreakers into the foyer. Red and blue strobes sliced through the gloom, lighting up the dust like a disco ball in hell. Thane! Medics are on the perimeter! Parker yelled over the noise, her voice a steady anchor in the storm. I didn't stop for pleasantries. I stepped over the agents, zip-tying Ethan on the kitchen floor, my eyes locked on the exit. Medical! Prep the dialysis unit! Now! My voice tore from my throat as I crossed the threshold, sprinting toward the ambulance idling in the driveway. 2 officers dragged Leanne out behind me. Her designer dress was a mess, but she was still screaming, ranting about how I was never there, playing the victim right to the bitter end. Get your hands off her. That is my mother. Her face twisted, feral, pure greed stripping away her humanity. You think a parent's love is unconditional? Wait until your own flesh and blood tries to murder you for a bank balance. You'll see those conditions change real fast. Out in the driveway, under the harsh glare of the industrial floods, I threw up a hand to stop the stretcher right there on the pavement. They dragged Leanie past me, her voice still shrill, spitting lies like broken glass. I reached into my jacket, grabbed my tablet, and lit up the dark driveway with its cold blue glow. I shoved the 4K freeze frame right in her face, Leanie, grinding pills into the tea. I held it there until her eyes went wide and she finally shut her mouth. Take a good look, Leanie. You are looking at the blueprint of your future. Steel bars and concrete floors. My voice was colder than a Minnesota freeze. She stared at the proof of her betrayal, her lip trembling. I can explain. Ethan made me do it. The doting daughter act fell apart instantly, crumbling into a pathetic pile of excuses. As the cops shoved her toward the cruiser, she screamed that Dr. Boyd was already airborne, headed for a non-extradition safe haven. I just watched her go. She had no idea I already had Agent Parker flag the flight. They would be turning that plane around over the Atlantic before the seatbelt sign went off. The cruiser peeled out, tires crunching gravel. I spun back toward the ambulance. Agent Parker's voice was a whisper in my ear. The toxins in Era's blood were way more advanced than the first labs showed. I squeezed Era's freezing hand as the sirens started to wail. The rig didn't just drive. It tore through the midnight streets of Edina, a blur of red and white fury, the only thing keeping my wife's heart from stopping cold in the winter frost. I held on tight inside the swaying cabin. I stared at the floor vibrating under my boots. The sirens were screaming, but right then, it was the only music I wanted to hear. The lead medic, face tight with stress, leaned over the cardiac monitor. She is bottoming out, he shouted. Get toxicology on the line, now. That is when I knew the ambulance Leanie had staged for the fake stroke wasn't for rescue. It was a private transport owned by one of Brandon Walsh's shell corps. A hearse in waiting. Stay with me, Era, I choked out. I just got you back. Don't you dare leave me. My whisper was lost in the siren's howl, but Parker's warning kept echoing in my head. Complex toxins. I watched the medics fighting a losing battle to keep her blood pressure from tanking. I realized something then. I might have won the physical fight back at the house, but the chemical war inside my wife was just getting started. You spend a lifetime calculating load limits for steel beams, but nothing prepares you to calculate the survival odds of your own soul. We screeched into the bay of a secure hospital wing the FBI had prepped. The stretcher wheels screamed on the polished tile, echoing like gunshots in an empty hall. The sharp smell of ozone and bleach hit me as we rushed under the flickering fluorescent lights. A wall of doctors stopped me at the detox suite. Mr. Garrison, back up. We need room. Initiating full-body dialysis, someone yelled. I leaned against the cold wall, watching through a small glass pane as they shoved a breathing tube down her throat. It was a blur of blue scrubs and panic, flashes of silver instruments. The isolation out here felt heavier than any skyscraper I ever built. Tell me she is gonna wake up, I begged a passing nurse. She didn't even look at me, just the hum of machines and the beep of monitors, that heavy silence you only find in hospitals and morgues. Hours bled into early morning before a doctor finally came out. Dr. Karen Mills, 50-year-old toxicologist, eyes that had seen too much evil. She held her clipboard tight like a shield. She looked drained. Mr. Garrison, this wasn't just a poisoning. It was a chemical eraser, she said, her voice low. These weren't sedatives. It was a neurodegenerative cocktail, designed to mimic Alzheimer's, while it systematically shuts down the central nervous system. Ara was less than 72 hours away from total system failure. Then she dropped the bomb that knocked the world off its axis. The scopolamine concentration we found? It came from a high-security facility. This isn't just a rogue doctor and a greedy daughter. You are up against a network. Even if we flush the toxins from her blood, the neurological damage, the woman you remember might not come back, she whispered. I sat alone in that sterile waiting room, the taste of cold hospital coffee sitting on my tongue like wet ash. I shifted in the plastic chair, the sting of antiseptic high in my nose, realizing the $28 million wasn't a settlement for Leanne. It was the buy-in for something straight out of hell. Agent Parker's heels struck the tile with the rhythmic precision of a firing squad. She marched toward me, her face lit by the ghost blue glow of a laptop that held the receipt for my wife's life. I stayed cornered in that secure holding room, my spine grinding against the unforgiving chair, feeling the crushing weight of the last 24 hours deep in my bones. The air reeked of industrial floor wax, a scent I used to love at a job site. But tonight, it smelled like a funeral home. I watched the shadows deepen under Parker's eyes as she took the seat opposite me, the laptop fan the only sound in that airless box. She didn't offer condolences. She offered hard data. I leaned in, my mouth dry as a desert highway, watching her fingers work the mouse with a sharp, mechanical click. I learned that Leanne's financial ruin wasn't a slow slide into bad habits. It was a controlled structural collapse. The forensic audit tracked massive wire transfers to an offshore syndicate calling itself the Red Vault. My daughter hadn't just made a mistake. She was the prey. This debt wasn't from a lifetime of bad poker faces. It was a single weekend in a rigged game, engineered to gut trust fund kids with deep pockets and deeper insecurities. $4 million in debt? I choked out, my voice sounding like gravel in a mixer. How did they even get her in the room? They weren't after the cash, Thane, Parker replied, her voice dead flat. They wanted the leverage on your wife's life. To a builder, a blueprint is a promise. To these monsters, that ledger was a script for a slow-motion execution. Parker opened an encrypted file from Brandon Walsh's server, and the air in my lungs felt like it turned into solid concrete. The file was titled Garrison Liquidation. It was a cold, architectural plan for dismantling my entire world. I watched the columns scroll past. Ara's jewelry collection with black market estimates, the inventory of her art gallery, and even our estate, listed with projected foreclosure dates. They already set a date to auction her engagement ring, I whispered, staring at the screen where my life's commitment was reduced to a barcode. Next month. Ethan wasn't her boyfriend. He was the liquidator. He was the pipeline between your daughter and the cartel. The most terrifying column was labeled D+. My stomach dropped as I realized it was a formula calculating how fast the insurance would clear after a confirmed natural death. They had timed her murder to maximize their profit margins, ensuring the trust fund would unlock before anyone asked questions. A cold, calculated fury began to rise in my chest. It was the strategic realization that the child I raised had handed the blueprints of our sanctuary to the wolves waiting outside. How do you explain to a man who built a legacy that his own blood sold the foundation for scraps? I stared at the screen, my mind shifting from grief to a demolition plan of my own. But as Parker scrolled through the syndicate's contacts, I saw a name that made the earth stop spinning. It wasn't just lowlifes and gamblers. I recognized the name of a rival developer, a man I'd played golf with for years. The same man who had been pressuring me into a merger, a hostile takeover I had blocked at every board meeting. I realized my daughter was just the wedge he used to crack my foundation. He didn't just want my company. He wanted to bulldoze my family to clear the lot for himself. I stared at that name on the screen, the man I'd shared drinks with at the club, and finally understood that Leanne was just a tool in his corporate war. The scene shifted from the clinical white of Dr. Boyd's office to a sea of tactical black armor. My tablet streamed the feed as the architect of Ara's misery realized his time playing God was officially up. I sat in an FBI surveillance van 2 blocks away, grounded by the hum of servers and the smell of stale coffee as the raid kicked off. Through the hidden camera feed, I saw Dr. Richard Cole freeze. He wasn't looking at a patient's chart. He was staring at the proximity alert flashing on his phone. His wild silver hair whipped around in the dim light as he lunged toward the heavy-duty industrial shredder tucked in the corner. The machine roared to life, a mechanical growl devouring Ara's original medical history as he frantically fed the pages into its teeth. Lock down the servers. Do not let him purge the patient logs. Agent Parker's voice crackled with static in my earpiece. The tactical team kicked the reinforced oak doors off their hinges, but Boyd wasn't the type to get cornered without a rat hole. He vanished through a hidden panel behind the bathroom mirror. Someone shouted, "He's inside the wall. Check the freight elevator." In that split second, I realized Boyd wasn't just running for his life. He was executing a scorched earth policy. He had rigged a dead man's switch to a cloud server, programmed to blast fake dementia diagnoses to the press if he missed a 6-hour check-in. If he couldn't put her in the ground, he was damn well going to bury her good name. Vermin always know where the drain pipes are, and Boyd had spent years tunneling through the foundation of his Hippocratic oath. Parker's voice spiked in my ear. Boyd's burner phone just triangulated to a private tarmac outside St. Paul. I didn't ask for a green light. I slammed the SUV into drive, mentally mapping the range of the Cirrus jet registered to that shell corporation. The bitter Minnesota autumn gale slapped my face as I floored it toward the airfield, the horizon looking like a fresh bruise. Screeched up to the chain-link fence, right as the first wave of Bureau cruisers tore onto the runway, sirens wailing like banshees. He filed for Nassau. "We have less than 3 minutes before wheels up." Parker sounded lethal. Clip his wings. Box him in with the trucks. I gripped the wire mesh until my knuckles turned bone white, watching the black SUVs swarm the small aircraft against the hangar bay. Rubber burned. Brakes locked up. The friendly skies were officially closed. The jet engine's whine sputtered into a dying whistle, replaced by the heavy stench of kerosene and scorched tires. The hatch flew open, and 3 TAC team agents yanked Dr. Boyd onto the tarmac, his $1,000 silk shirt smeared with grease. He looked wrecked, but his eyes were still spitting pure poison. As they hauled him toward the lead cruiser, he started squealing, his voice cracking into high-octave panic. It was Lainey. She's the one who ordered the air embolism. He was hysterical now. She was the mastermind. I just held the scalpel. I watched the man who tried to delete my wife's existence, feeling a hollow, frigid sort of justice. Boyd was eating pavement, sweat plastering that silver hair to his skull, but his final glance at me screamed that the damage was already done. I pulled out my phone. Breaking news notifications flooded the screen, headlines screaming about the garrison matriarch's secret cognitive collapse. The woman who spent decades building a legacy was being dismantled in real time. Boyd's capture felt meaningless. Back in Ara's hospital suite, my pocket wouldn't stop buzzing. That digital trap had detonated, firing off fake psych evaluations to every major donor in the family Rolodex. The vibration against my leg felt like a manic, mechanical heartbeat, signaling the systematic demolition of her reputation. I stood paralyzed by her bedside. The sharp tang of ozone and hospital bleach hit me as Parker and I scrolled through the fallout. It was a hit job, a perfect character assassination. The files claimed Ara had been battling advanced dementia for years, and that I had been hiding her away to keep my grip on the power. This goes beyond murder, Parker. She didn't just want her dead. She wanted her erased from history. My voice was gravel, rage tightening in my chest like a vice. This was Lainey's failsafe. Torch Ara's credibility. So if she ever woke up, no one would believe a word she said. Parker didn't blink, eyes glued to the tablet. We fight back with the 4K surveillance tapes. Raw footage trumps fake papers, she promised. But I could see the lie spreading online like a virus. Have you ever stared at the person you love and known they have been screaming for help from a prison inside their own body? I whipped around as the cardiac monitor broke its slow rhythm, spiking into a fast, urgent staccato. Ara's eyelids fluttered, and that glassy, empty look vanished, replaced by a sharp, agonizing clarity that nearly brought me to my knees. Her eyes locked onto mine instantly, fingers clutching my wrist with a grip that shocked the nursing staff. "Fane," she rasped, her voice barely a whisper. Her skin felt like dry parchment against my hand. Then the floodgates opened. The words spilled out in a frantic, terrified rush, like she was racing against the brain fog trying to pull her back under. She described a cruelty so dark I couldn't wrap my head around it. Leanne wasn't just filming Aura's bad days to fake a dementia diagnosis. She was using a hidden shock collar to force the twitching and terror we saw in those videos. My daughter wasn't just poisoning her, she was torturing her. Aura remembered every bitter cup, every icy smirk. I heard them. Aura choked out, eyes wild with heartbreak. Couldn't move my tongue, but I heard her laughing with that man in our kitchen. She told me the tea was medicine, called it mercy, while she poured it down my throat. We sat frozen in the wreckage of our lives. The heart monitor beeped steadily, the only sound in the room. But the relief didn't last. Aura's fingernails suddenly dug into my arm, sharp and desperate. She pulled me down, dropping her voice to a terrified whisper. Leanne said something right before the cops took her. She threatened me, said if she got arrested, she had a backup team ready to finish me off in the hospital. My blood ran cold. Getting her out of the house wasn't the end. It was just halftime. Aura's eyes snapped to the door, wide with fear. As a nurse I didn't recognize, walked past the window. Aura squeezed my arm tighter. Her voice was just a dry rattle as she stared at the hallway and whispered, "That nurse. She wasn't on the roster." I didn't wait to see if the woman was reaching for a weapon. I lunged for the panic button, slamming it hard while dragging Aura's bed into the bathroom and bolting the heavy door. Glass exploded in the corridor the second the latch clicked. The vibration of the alarm buzzed in my hand, a mechanical echo of the adrenaline jackhammering in my chest. The tiny bathroom reeked of bleach and ozone, but it was safe. I hugged Aura close, her thin body trembling against me as chaos erupted in the suite outside. A second gunshot cracked through the air vents, followed by the sound of shattering debris. It was over in less than 2 minutes. By the time Agent Parker gave the all-clear, the assassin was face down on the floor, taken out by the FBI. Parker confirmed the shooter was a pro cleaner on Ethan's payroll. I clenched my jaw so hard I thought my teeth would crack. I knew right then, as long as Leanne thought she had a 1% shot at the money, Aura was a walking target. They won't stop, Parker. Not while there's a trust fund to inherit. I spoke with the cold precision of a man who spent his life inspecting steel beams. Parker frowned. "You're going to the jail?" "Sir, she's a master manipulator." I didn't give a damn. I'd already decided to cut the cord. I was going to destroy her hope completely. You don't renovate a condemned building. You bring in a wrecking ball. And I was the ball. 2 days later, I stood in the Hennepin County Jail, breathing in the stale mix of cleaning chemicals and sweat. I took my seat on the visitor's side of the glass, palms flat on the freezing metal ledge. They dragged Leanne in, looking like a total wreck, but she immediately started the act. "Daddy, thank God Ethan made me do it. He said he'd kill me," she wailed, squeezing out tears that looked like cheap props to me now. I stayed quiet, watching the muscles in her face like I was looking for cracks in a load-bearing wall. No remorse, just a trapped predator looking for a way out. I told her the hospital cameras caught more than just the hitman. They picked up the call she made from a smuggled burner phone, ordering the hit. "I'm not here as your father, Leanne. I'm here as the executor of the legacy you tried to steal." My voice was dead cold. I slammed a thick file against the glass. Total disinheritance. And a court order stripping the Garrison name off her back forever. She stopped crying. The mask fell away. The monster looked back at me. Her eyes narrowed, the blue hardening into a flat, predatory gray. "You can't do that," she hissed the words, dropping the act completely. "That money is mine by right." I looked at her, feeling a clinical detachment I hadn't known I possessed. I told her then that the $28 million Garrison Trust had already been dissolved and moved into a protected charitable foundation for elder abuse victims. Her inheritance now had a literal value of 0. "The foundation is ironclad, Laney. You killed the daughter I loved, so I killed the future you wanted." She stared at the paper, the reality of her bankruptcy finally sinking in. She wasn't just losing her freedom. She was losing the prize she had sold her soul for. Laney lunged at the glass, her fingernails screeching against the surface like a wild animal's. The sound pierced the quiet room, her face contorted with a desperate, primal greed. Her mouth opened to scream obscenities I refused to hear. I didn't flinch. I just stood up, adjusted my watch, and turned my back on her, leaving her to the silence of the cell she'd built for herself. The structural repair was finally complete, even if the building was now half empty. I didn't give attorney Paul Green the courtesy of a phone call. I walked into his mahogany-lined office with the FBI as the vanguard. I watched the color drain from his face like spilled grout as they began seizing the files that held the remains of my wife's stolen future. Attorney Paul Green, a 59-year-old estate lawyer with silver-cuffed sleeves and a reputation for ironclad trusts, looked like a man who had just watched his own foundation crumble in real time. He stood behind a desk that smelled of expensive leather and old paper. His hands trembled as he reached for a telephone he was never going to be allowed to use. I discovered right then that the rot went deeper than I'd feared. Howard hadn't just looked the other way. He had a secondary insurance policy on my own life taken out by Laney, which would have tripled his payout if my death had followed Ara's as a staged suicide. I watched Agent Parker's team move through the space, their blue FBI windbreakers, a sharp clinical contrast against the warm mahogany walls. They uncovered a vault of falsified documents, including the original trust amendment Laney had forced Ara to sign. It was already stamped and notarized by Barnes, despite the fact that Ara hadn't set foot in this building for over a year. "I've represented you for 20 years, Thane. You can't do this," Howard stammered, his voice cracking with the cold, metallic taste of fear. I leaned over his desk, my gaze level and unforgiving. "You didn't represent me, Howard. You represented the price of your own silence. How many years of friendship is a man's soul worth?" For Howard, the answer was $50,000 and a seat on a board that didn't exist. I watched as they hauled him out, realizing he had been laundering Laney's gambling money through fake corporate expenses for years. He was the legal pillar that had allowed the poison to spread. As we exited the building, the air of downtown Minneapolis was thick with the blinding pop of camera flashes. The local news crews had arrived like vultures to a carcass, tipped off by the commotion of the raid. The Adina poisoning headline was already spreading like a structural fire through social media. I threw myself into the back of the SUV, the heavy door thudding shut to provide a temporary barrier against the chaos. "Turn off the radio, Thine. It's a circus out there," Parker said, her voice tight as she climbed in beside me. I ignored her, staring at my phone as the first leaked images of Ara's gurney being carried out of our house appeared online. "They're calling her the Silent Ice," I muttered, feeling a protective anger boil in my gut. They have no idea she was screaming the whole time. Our privacy wasn't just compromised. It was a casualty of the war Laney had started. Flashbulbs. The sharks were in the water. We needed to move. The low hum of the SUV's tires on the wet pavement was the only sound as we accelerated away from the courthouse. I felt a sense of professional vindication as the legal pillars of the conspiracy were dismantled, but it was hollowed out by the sheer scale of the betrayal. A local reporter on the screen mentioned that Laney had even been secretly filming a caregiver documentary to sell to a streaming service. She planned to profit from Ara's staged decline even after she was gone. The calculated nature of it made my stomach turn. Every smile, every doting touch I had seen in those fake videos had been a commodity. The world wanted a piece of the Garrison tragedy. But as the SUV pulled onto the highway toward Lake Minnetonka, seeking the only perimeter I had left to defend, I realized the data dump from the Dead Man's Switch contained one file we hadn't opened. The file was from Ara, time-stamped 2 years ago. I stared at the icon on the tablet, my thumb hovering over the glass, terrified of the truth my wife had tried to spill before our tea had even gone cold. Outside, heavy curtains of snow were burying Lake Minnetonka in white silence. It smothered the city noise and the tabloid scandal. Like the earth was begging for a clean slate I wasn't sure we had earned. The iron gates of the estate had been shut tight for weeks. We were locked in, the world's chaos walled out. The only sounds in the house were the low snap of the library fire and the grandfather clock counting down the seconds. I sank into the leather armchair, running my fingers along the cold edge of the tablet. It held the last piece of the wreckage. I took a breath and opened the file. No legal threats, no clinical reports. Just a raw, prophetic letter. And a secret. Alara had built a lifeboat years ago, a secret emergency fund stashed in an offshore trust I couldn't touch until right now. She did it because she knew. She knew Lainey would try to bleed us dry one day. She had spotted the cracks in our daughter's soul while I was still looking at the blueprints. In the letter, Era wrote about a creeping dread, a coldness growing between her and Lainey, a hollow, starving emptiness she couldn't explain. I read the words out loud to Era. She was bundled under a heavy wool blanket, her eyes tracing every painful line as I spoke. She knew, I said, my voice thick with grief. She knew we loved her, and she used that love as her way in. I couldn't tell you, she whispered. I didn't want to believe my own blood could be that empty. We sat there by the firelight, finding a strange kind of closure in admitting just how blind we'd both been. Can you ever really burn a memory? Or do you just get used to the smell of the smoke? That question wouldn't leave me alone as I spent the afternoon dragging a heavy cardboard box out to the stone pit by the frozen lake. It was filled with the artifacts of a life that was nothing but a lie. Lainey's academic trophies, silver-framed photos, designer clothes bought with stolen money. Era came out to meet me, the sub-zero wind flushing her cheeks pink. She didn't flinch. With a hand that still shook a little, she struck the match against the stone. The flame hissed. The past caught fire. We watched silk and paper curl into black ash, the smell of burning fabric and wood smoke drifting up into the twilight. It has to go, Era. Every scrap of the lie, I said. She just nodded, eyes locked on the orange sparks floating into the black sky. Let the wind have the rest of her, she said. We've got a winter to survive. We stood there until the fire died down to glowing coals. It was a necessary demolition. We had to clear the site before we could build anything new from the rubble. Christmas Eve came with a silence I hadn't felt in 30 years. No galas, no invites, no $28 million empire to defend. We spent the night in the great room, lit only by the fireplace and a couple of candles. Ara's hands still trembled around her tea mug, but her eyes were clear, sharp. Merry Christmas, Thane, she said softly. We're still standing. That's when it hit me. Strong structures aren't the ones that never crack. They're the ones that refuse to collapse. My phone buzzed on the table. A final text from Agent Parker. Lainey was refusing visitors. She'd started calling herself by Ethan's last name, fully embracing the predator she really was. I didn't show Era. We just sat there, as the embers faded. The year's weight was finally lifting, but staring out at the dark lake. I knew the house was secure. But the world never looks the same once you've seen the blueprints of your own daughter's hate. We were survivors, facing a hazy future together. Going from the quiet of Minnetonka to the echoing marble of the federal courthouse felt like walking out of a sanctuary and into a war zone. My grip tightened on the briefcase handle, the leather freezing against my palm. Walking through security, I thought about how the winter had started to heal us. But with the trial date for Lainey and Brandon Walsh looming, the pressure was back, heavy, crushing like a hydraulic press. I'd seen the schematic of my daughter's malice. Now, I had to watch the world tear it apart. I walked into the U.S. Attorney's office. The air smelled like industrial cleaner and old law books. Attorney James Ford was waiting, 48 years old, a smile like a razor blade, and a reputation for winning the messy cases. He looked at me with eyes that saw people as data points, evidence. He motioned for me to sit. I stayed standing. I stared at the wall of banker boxes stacked against the dark mahogany paneling. The judge had just tossed our best evidence, the ultra-high-def footage of the poisoned tea, thanks to some loophole about a signal jammer. It was a crack in our foundation I never saw coming. Now, our entire case hung on Ara, a woman whose memory was still full of holes from the toxins. Marcus hit the lights, and the projector hummed to life, splashing a grainy video across the wall. It was Lean's deposition. There she was, pale, shaking, looking like a porcelain doll. She was selling it perfectly. Seeing those crocodile tears in high resolution made me want to retch. Forget the evidence, Thane. Thorne didn't even look up. They're attacking the story. She's playing the poor little rich girl, the daughter Daddy left behind. Juries eat that stuff up. How do you fight a lie when it wears your kid's face and cries on cue? I bad spent a lifetime building walls to keep Era safe. But in that conference room, those walls felt paper thin. Marcus slammed a thick binder onto the table, the thud echoing like a gavel. They're calling you the puppet master. The narrative is that you drove Lean crazy just to grab the trust fund. I sat there, listening to Thorne lay out their game plan. They were casting me as the villain, the cold, heartless architect who rigged his own home to frame his daughter before his wife could file for divorce. Total fiction, but dangerous. They even dug up a ghost from my past, some foreman I canned years ago for cutting corners. He was ready to swear under oath that I faked structural reports for sport. Outside, a city bus hissed to a stop, breaking the silence. That's when it hit me they weren't trying to clear her name. They just wanted to drag me into the mud with her. I didn't build a trap to frame her. I installed a window into the hell she was creating. I started to shout, but the file snapped shut, cutting me off. The ground was shifting beneath us. Thorne gave me a look that said, "We're not done yet," and slid a folder across the table. Jailhouse mail. Apparently, she had been writing apology letters to Ara. But as I scanned them, I saw the truth. Hidden triggers. References to the hospital psychological warfare designed to break Ara before she even took the stand. Then came the knockout blow. A subpoena for Ara. They were dragging her into court, betting everything that she would crumble under the lights. I walked to the witness stand feeling the weight of 30 years of steel on my back. Today, I wasn't building a skyscraper. I was welding the bars on my daughter's cell. The courtroom smelled like furniture polish and old lies, the air conditioner humming loud enough to rattle my teeth. Attorney Diana Sharp, a 42-year-old shark, moved with a predator's grace in a suit that cost more than a mid-range sedan, circling me like I was a building she planned to demolish. She came out swinging, painting me as the absentee tycoon who loved concrete more than his own kin. "Mr. Garrison, isn't it true you only stepped in when you saw the money moving?" Her voice dripped with acid. I kept my face like stone, refusing to take the bait. "I stepped in because you can't put a price tag on a life," I said, my voice steady. "Unlike your ethics." I walked the jury through finding the bruises. I didn't sound like a grieving husband. I sounded like an engineer analyzing a catastrophic structural failure. The stenographer's keys clicked like a metronome, capturing every word. Then, dead silence. A juror looked away from the screen, unable to stomach the slow-motion homicide I was describing. Vance's story started to crack when I played my ace. I didn't just install cameras. I looked right at the jury. I retrofitted the floor joists in the master bedroom with industrial pressure sensors. I have digital logs placing Lean and Brandon Walsh in that room at 3 in the morning. The exact time they plotted the embolism. Vance went white, her defense crumbling in real time. Prosecutor Thorne didn't miss a beat. He jumped up. "Your Honor, in light of this, we move to admit the suppressed video footage." My attorney slapped the new forensic report on the table, proof that the signal jammer wasn't mine, but registered to Brandon Walsh. That one detail blew the hinges off the technicality they'd used to suppress our smoking gun. Judge Sterling scanned the document for a long, suffocating minute, then gave a sharp nod to the tech crew. Overhead lights died, plunging the room into shadow as the monitors flickered on, casting a cold, electric blue glow over the jury. The silence in that room was heavy, like the split second after a demolition charge is triggered but before the building starts to fall. Then, Leanne's face filled the 40-foot screens. The jury leaned in, horrified, watching her grind blue and white pills into a fine powder over a steaming cup of tea. Her hands were steady, surgical, not a trace of a conscience. "Look at her eyes," a woman in the front row whispered, her voice cutting through the quiet. "She's actually enjoying it." I glanced at the defense table and saw Leanne clawing at the mahogany, her knuckles bleached white, the pressure cracking her perfect daughter mask wide open. The video played on a high-definition record of betrayal that no high-priced lawyer could spin away. It was the blueprint of a murder, captured frame by frame, stopped only by a miracle. The entire room sucked in a breath at once, a vacuum of judgment pinning Leanne to her seat until she couldn't take the weight. She snapped. Her chair screeched against the parquet as she shot up like she'd been electrocuted. But there were no tears, no begging. She just started screaming at her own reflection on the screen, a raw, jagged noise that scraped against the walls. She had it coming, she shrieked, face twisting into the same demon I'd caught in my kitchen. She was too weak. She couldn't handle the Empire. You would have burned it all to the ground. That scream tore through the courtroom, stripping away the innocent act for good and leaving the jury staring at the monster I'd known was there all along. I leaned back in the witness box, hands finally steady, watching the total demolition of the lie she'd spent a year constructing. The rear doors groaned open with a heavy thud, and Lara walked in. She moved with a slow, deliberate cadence, her presence silencing the gallery faster than any gavel strike. I watched from the front, my chest tightening with a strange mix of pride and lingering terror. The smell of floor wax and old wood felt thick in my throat, the scent of institutional justice. Lara took the stand, spine steel straight despite the toxins that had ravaged her system. She didn't even glance at the defense table. She spoke softly, but with a clarity that had every juror leaning over the rail. She talked about the scopolamine drift, the sensation of being buried alive in her own skin, watching her daughter pick through the house like a vulture. I don't have Alzheimer's. I'm a survivor of my daughter, she said, voice unbreakable. She told me I was fading away, but she was the one holding the eraser. Then came the nail in the coffin evidence the defense never saw coming. Lara revealed she'd sewn a micro-recorder into her mattress lining, a spot Leanne missed. It caught Leanne and Ethan shopping for crematoriums, specifically ones that wouldn't check for chemical residue after an air embolism. It wasn't the poison that broke me, she told the jury. It was her smile when she handed me the cup. Guilty. The word hit the floor like a steel beam. Hearing the clerk read it out felt like the first breath of clean air I'd taken in 12 months. The jury didn't miss a beat. Guilty on all counts. Attempted murder, fraud, conspiracy. Leanne sat frozen, her act completely incinerated by the weight of those tapes. Judge Marcus Sterling, looking like he was carved from the same granite as the courthouse, peered down at Leanne with cold, objective disdain. He wasn't there to offer therapy. You treated a human life like a line item on a spreadsheet, Leanne. Now the state is going to balance the books with your freedom. He called it extraordinary cruelty, calculated chemical warfare against a parent. When he dropped the sentence 22 years, federal, no parole, the gavel slammed down like a coffin lid. I watched the marshals haul her away, the metallic click of handcuffs echoing off the oak panels. I didn't feel angry anymore. Just the cold satisfaction of a builder who finally tore out the rot so the foundation could hold again. The steel cuffs snapped into place. That cell didn't just lock. It felt like they were welding a coffin shut. Watching Lean get hauled off was like seeing the load-bearing wall of their little empire finally give way. Then Brandon Walsh's attorney stood up and dropped the bomb his client was flipping. He was trading secrets on the developer who bankrolled this whole mess to save his own skin. The whole operation was crumbling, crashing down faster than a condemned building in an earthquake. I rose and found Era's fingers. Her grip was ice cold, but as I squeezed back, I could feel the life returning to us. 22 years of hell. Let's get out of here, Era, I whispered. We're going home. She sagged against my side, and for the first time in forever, the shaking in her hands actually stopped. We stepped out onto the sidewalk, the Minnesota sunshine hitting the marble so hard it hurt to look. We left the circus inside, and I didn't bother glancing back. I didn't care about the squad car peeling out or the vultures with microphones fighting for a soundbite. I didn't need pictures. The schematic of how they stabbed us in the back was already burned into my memory. Getting to the car, it hit me. Sure, our four walls were safe now, but the view from the window was permanently altered. We were survivors retreating to the stillness of the lake, abandoning the wreckage. But in my head, I was still watching those massive oak doors at the Supreme Court slam shut on Attorney Paul Green. Lean was already rotting in a cell. That was a given. But the man who stamped his seal of approval on our nightmare was finally watching his career get put before the firing squad. The smell of industrial floor wax seemed stuck to my jacket, a chemical souvenir from the endless hearings it took to get here. I sat front and center, spine rigid as an I-beam, channeling every bit of discipline I'd learned in construction. I watched the board take Howard apart, piece by piece, stripping away his license to practice law. They laid it all out, hundreds of fake docs, and the way he washed Lean's gambling debts right through my company's books. Barnes tried to catch my eye, looking for some shred of our old friendship, but I was made of stone. "It's not just a piece of paper, Howard," I told him in the corridor later. "You lost the privilege of having a voice." "I was just doing what the client asked," he mumbled. I snapped the latches on my briefcase shut, the loud click cutting off his pathetic whining. The guy used to be a community pillar, but greed had termites eating him from the inside out. I walked away from the wreckage without a second glance. My brain was already drafting new plans. When you find rot, you don't just slap some spackle over it. You tear out the bad wood and rebuild with materials that won't decay. Era, Scott Parker and I, spent the next 2 months figuring out how to weaponize the $28 million in the Garrison Trust. This wasn't charity. We were drawing up schematics for survival. We poured that fortune into the ARA Protection Foundation, a shield designed to offer forensic audits for vulnerable seniors before the vultures circled. I micromanaged every inch of the new Minneapolis HQ construction. I needed that place to be safe as a church and tough as a bunker. We wired the place with the same military-grade sensors and surveillance tech I used to save my wife. Only now it was for the public good. The location was pure poetic justice. I bought the building attorney Paul Green lost when he went belly up. Standing in the lobby, the scent of fresh paint and cured glass filled the air. Beats the stale air of a courtroom, I thought, watching the new server banks hum to life with a cool blue glow. "This is the masterpiece, right here," Thane Beckett said, resting a hand on my shoulder. I nodded. I felt something like redemption. This wasn't some tax write-off. It was a warning beacon built on the wreckage of our past. We launched on a sharp October night, private, secure, strictly invite-only. Ara was right there with me, eyes sharp, even if she still needed my arm to stay steady. When she sliced that ribbon, the sound of the scissors was the only thing you could hear. It was a declaration of war against the poison Lean tried to feed us. Mid-party, Agent Parker dragged me into a corner. Her face was lit up by the ghostly pale light of her phone screen. "We got our first tip," she whispered. "It tracks back to another scheme run by that same developer who owned Lean's debt. Looks like the system works." A cold rush of satisfaction hit me. We'd finally constructed something indestructible. A fortress designed to stop that blueprint of hate from ever being built in someone else's home. But just as Era stepped up to the mic, I caught movement in the back of the room, a shadow I knew all too well. A tall, well-tailored figure lingered by the exit, watching with a predatory stillness that made the hair on my neck stand up. I realized then that the vultures weren't done circling. The final chapter of my legacy was still being drafted in the shadows. I wasn't about to let that dark figure in the back make it to the podium. I moved with a shark's grace, intercepting the rival developer's errand boy before he could poison the air of our new sanctuary. The envoy was a 30-something guy in a suit that was trying way too hard to look expensive, a crack in a pristine wall. He had the slick, arrogant look of a man who thought money could buy a way out of a structural collapse. I stepped right into his path, casting a long shadow over him. I didn't wait for his rehearsed pitch. I reached inside my jacket and slammed a heavy manila folder against his chest, the weight of it serving as a physical threat. "That is proof your boss is in bed with the Red Vault Syndicate," I said, my voice a low rumble vibrating with absolute authority. "Tell him the foundation he built is made of sand, and I am the tide." "The Garrison Foundation isn't just a charity," I continued, leaning in until he could see the cold steel in my eyes. "It is a watchdog. If he even breathes near my wife or my firm again, I will dismantle him brick by brick." I watched the blood drain from his face as he took the folder, hands trembling. He turned and vanished into the crowd, a parasite scurrying from the light. After the event, Agent Parker handed me one last piece of baggage, an unopened letter from federal prison. "This is the last piece of mail I am ever receiving from that zip code," I told her, tucking it away, a relic of a life I was finally ready to bury. The shredder didn't hesitate. Neither did I. A year later, the world was different. I stood on a stone balcony overlooking the rolling hills of Tuscany. The scent of lemons and warm earth rose to meet me in the golden afternoon. It was our 27th anniversary, a milestone I once feared we would never see. Ara stood beside me, the taste of aged Chianti on our lips. As we watched the sun dip toward the olive groves, I pulled that prison letter from my pocket. The paper was yellowed and crisp. I hadn't opened it. I didn't need to. I noticed the weight was off. When I shook the envelope, Leanne's signature gold ring fell into my palm. It was a pathetic gesture, a claim of ownership over the Garrison name she had already forfeited. I didn't feel anger, only a profound sense of closure. I placed the ring on the stone railing and brought a heavy marble bookend down on it with a single, decisive strike. I felt the gold crush, the metal flattening into a useless, distorted shape. "Do you want to know what she wrote?" I asked. "No. Her voice doesn't live in this house. Not anymore," she replied. Together, we fed the unopened letter into a small portable shredder I had placed on the patio table. The Italian sun wasn't just light. It was a kiln, firing the bricks of a new life that would never know the weight of a skyscraper again. The mechanical hum of the shredder was the final sound of erasing the monster who had once shared our blood. We watched the ink of her lies turn into harmless white confetti. I took the tray of paper scraps to the edge of the balcony and tossed them into the valley wind. I watched the white scraps of the past vanish into the Italian dusk, drifting over green hills until they were nothing more than dust. Era took my hand, her grip firm and steady. I realized then that I had legally changed our last name to her maiden name months ago, a final structural repair that Leanne would never be able to undo. The Garrison legacy was a ruin, but we were the architects of something new. I realized I had finally built the one thing that could never be demolished, a home that existed in the heart, not in the stone. We stood there in the silence, two survivors watching the stars emerge over a world that was finally truly ours. I thought I had retired from building when I left the Minneapolis skyline behind. But standing in the terminal upon our return from Tuscany, I realized the camera tech that saved my wife had become a blueprint for thousands of families I would never even meet. The world had transformed while we were away. The news of our survival had turned into a global catalyst for change. As I stepped back into the lobby of our foundation headquarters, the cool touch of a marble countertop under my hand felt familiar, yet different. I was no longer constructing towers of glass. I was building a shield. Tyler Brooks, the man who was supposed to be my son-in-law, stood in the lobby looking like a man who had spent a year wandering through a structural collapse. He approached me with a tentative, heavy step, his eyes reflecting a deep, hollow exhaustion. "I almost helped her, Thane. I almost believed the poison she spat about you," he said, his voice cracking with gut-wrenching sincerity. Julian tipped me off that Lean tried to pull a fast one from his cell, begging for bail money through a back channel I didn't even know existed. But Julian didn't bite. He handed the intel straight to the feds. I looked at the wreckage Lean left behind, and I decided my response wouldn't be revenge, but a clean slate for everyone else. That woman had a terrifying talent for spotting the hairline fractures in a man's soul. "Don't let her live rent-free in your mind, Julian," I told him, locking eyes. I gave him a solid handshake, the kind that says the nightmare is over and the real work begins. It got me thinking, how do you actually weigh a man's legacy? Is it counted in skylines and steel beams, or in the quiet peace of strangers sleeping safe behind the locks you designed? That question bounced around my skull as I paced the halls of the Institute. My creation, the ARA protocol, that blend of pressure sensors and forensic accounting, had officially gone worldwide. From my private office, I watched the news feed glow. Families from London to Tokyo were using my tech to shield their grandparents from vultures disguised as heirs. It hit me then. My monument wasn't made of glass and girders. It was built on the safety of living rooms I'd never even visit. Ara was right there next to me, her signature scent cutting through the sterile air of the server room like an anchor. She was back to full strength, standing tall, the living symbol of how we turned our personal hell into armor for the public. "The press is calling it the Master Builder's Shield," I mentioned to her. I pointed at the wall monitor, lit up with secure locations spanning the continent. Funny, considering it started as just a housing project. But for once in my life, the walls aren't crumbling. She looked back at me, eyes sharp and clear, no medication haze this time. The ticker tape scrolled past 1,000 messages of gratitude. My shift was finally over. Twilight was setting in when Scott Parker walked in. He handed me a dossier that weighed about as much as the final brick in a cathedral. The numbers were conclusive. Our legal team had bled the rival estate dry. We had wiped the floor with the syndicate that tried to tear us apart. Not a trace was left. Our life's foundation was finally solid again. The wolves were gone. I glanced at the photo on the wall, just Ara and me now. The survivors. The garrison name might be history, but what I built here, that is going to outlast every skyscraper in the city. Carrying the burden of 40 years of construction suddenly felt light, replaced by the simple reality of a home that was actually ours. I stood next to Ara at the glass, watching the season's first snowflakes drift down over the skyline. The blueprints were locked. The frame was sturdy. I was home. Later, out at Lake Minnetonka, the ice let out a low groan. It was a deep, shifting noise. In the old days, that sound would have made me panic and check the support beams. Tonight, it was just the soundtrack of a winter I didn't have to fight anymore. I leaned against the window of the cabin. You could almost smell the sharp pine and frost right through the pane. Behind me, the wood stove was cranking out heat, bathing the room in an amber light that pushed back the last year's darkness. I stared at the stars hanging over the frozen lake. I felt a calm deep in my gut that I never found at the top of a high-rise. Ara was moving around the kitchenette, her shadow dancing on the wall as she threw together a simple meal. No staff, no fancy silverware, no fake grins for the cameras. Just us, moving in sync like we were following a new design. A design based on the silent understanding between two people who stared into the abyss and decided not to jump. I think I'm finished with the skyline, Ara, I said, turning around. I'd rather focus on keeping this specific roof from caving in. She looked up, a small smile playing on her face. The view is better down here anyway, Thane. We can see the actual stars, instead of just the reflection of our own egos. Time isn't linear. It's a loop. And tonight, that loop closed, and we're finally safe on the inside. I gazed out at the black void of the lake, and my mind drifted back to the Adina property. I had torn that place down, brick by painful brick, and sold the scraps to fund the expansion. I had to make sure that House of Horrors never sheltered anyone else. Now it is a public park. Green grass instead of greed. Took me a lifetime to learn that the strongest structures aren't made of steel beams, they are made of the moments you fight to keep safe. I did one last sweep of the perimeter. Old habits. As the clock ticked toward midnight, the ice boomed again. A reminder that nature is the only thing you can't engineer. I glanced at the monitors one last time. Not because I was paranoid, but because I finally had something worth protecting. I looked up at the warm light in the window. Ara was waiting. Her presence was a lighthouse in the dead of winter. For the first time in 30 years, I wasn't obsessing over a legacy that would outlive me. I was living for her, the woman who made the struggle worth it in the first place. Then, the clock struck midnight. The calendar turned. We stood our ground. The grandfather clock in the hall ticked away the change, a steady, rhythmic heartbeat. As the final seconds of the year bled out, I walked back into the living room and sank into the cushion beside Ara. I brought up my private server one last time, the screen's icy blue glow washing over my face. With one decisive keystroke, I wiped the last of the 4K surveillance footage capturing the poisoning. I didn't need a record of her agony. I chose to keep only the memories of her healing, the echo of her laugh returning. The data vanished into the ether, finally scrubbing away the toxic rot that had tried to bury us. The foundation is deep. The walls are true. I whispered it more to convince myself than her. Ara rested her head on my shoulder, her fingers interlacing with mine. Let the new year roll in, Fane. We're ready. Distant fireworks popped over the lake, mere pinpricks of fire against the black void, silent explosions that couldn't touch our peace. In the window's reflection, I saw the only thing that mattered. A husband and wife who had stared down their own destruction and survived. The job was done. The house was locked down. The blueprints were ash. For the first time, the master builder could finally rest. When I look back on this family tragedy, I don't just see a crime. I see my own willful blindness. I engineered towers to withstand earthquakes, yet I ignored the tremors fracturing my own home. This nightmare forced me to swallow a bitter pill. Being a titan of industry doesn't make you wise in love. I mistook silence for stability. I assumed shared blood meant shared loyalty. I was dead wrong. If you take one lesson from this story, make it this. Don't wait for a smoking gun when your gut is already screaming at you. Ask the ugly questions. Protect the weak before the cracks turn into canyons. I told myself I was too busy being the provider. The truth? I was a coward avoiding the uncomfortable. Don't make my mistake. Don't let your ego or your routine blind you to the rot in your own foundation. Some folks call what I did dad revenge. But dad, revenge wasn't about punishment. It was about protection. Real dad revenge is having the guts to choose truth over denial. It's standing as a shield between the danger and the person you love, even when that danger shares your last name. I've spent nights asking God why, and I still don't have an answer. But I believe He gave me the clarity to choose hard truth over easy comfort. I didn't just lose a daughter that day. I lost an illusion. And sometimes, shattering the illusion is the only way to save a life. Thanks for riding with me to the end of this journey. Sound off in the comments below. What would you have done if you were in Thane's shoes, facing betrayal at your own dinner table? I genuinely want to hear your take. If this story hit a nerve, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next chapter. Just a heads up, while we pull from Reed's issues, we've ramped up the drama for the storytelling. If this isn't your vibe, feel free to click away and find something that speaks to you.